Hello and welcome to a Halloween edition of Crawl Error with VirtuaCon. I'm Dan Taylor, and today on this session I have been joined by Aleyda Solis of Oriandi. Hello Aleyda, how are you doing?
Hello, how are you? Thank you very much for the opportunity to allow me to come here and in my best indie type of spirit here for Halloween.
So there we go. Believe it or not, that is the whip that Aleyda does use for developers that she's brought with us today, so that's proof. So obviously no one's come here to watch me speak, everyone's come here for Aleyda. So Aleyda, without further ado, over to you.
Thank you very much. And please don't be scared from this. I'm not going to use them today, hopefully. Let's see. You never know. Thank you very much then for the opportunity. And I am going to be sharing right now a few slides that I have prepared for you today, speaking about one of my favorite topics, very scary, and I will say very on topic for today type of session, right? Like, because this is what it is. It is Halloween. Scary, supposed to be scary, and today I'm going to share SEO horror stories, right? Like, and you may ask why, where does it all come from? And I am going to go a little bit back in time to literally 5 years ago. I came up with this idea to start sharing my own challenges and fuck-ups that I experienced during Halloween, because I say, okay, let's laugh a little bit from this, right? And then it became a trending topic. A lot of other SEOs started sharing theirs. Funnily enough, take a look at those top ones that were shared at the time, right? Like Google Analytics complaining about Flash, and then Matt Cutts also talking about, yeah, what spam and some things like, yeah, I feel very old all of a sudden, right? But shockingly, and this is the thing, right? Like, I went through many of this, and then I have realized that they are still very sadly very common in our day-to-day, right? These two, for example, that were shared from by Barry and Rishi, we will see that a few of this come up later on. So this year I decided, when Dan asked me, okay, let's do something for Halloween, I said, which will be the best topic than this one, right? So I decided to go back to this SEO horror stories topics to see which are the ones that are the worst nowadays, which are still relevant from the past, and which are the ones that more SEOs are sharing at the moment that are hurting the most, right? And of course, I didn't want it only share mine, so I asked over Twitter a few weeks ago about which are the ones that SEOs nowadays are seeing like the worst ever, or at least like the ones that they see come up again and again with clients. Like, and to start a little bit, let's go back to the fundamental, to the classic ones, the ones that happened 5 years ago, very likely also when since SEO became a thing, right? And are still very scary and triggered by certain type of scenarios today. Let's start with the triggers by web migrations, right? Like, I don't think this is a surprise, I'm afraid, right? Actually, this is one that is happening right now, that Lily Ray, like a few months ago, she was like, oh my God, Nordstrom is doing a web migration at the moment. And I went to check, and yes, this is happening, shockingly, right? Like, they are moving everything from the shop subdomain to the www one. And I thought that they might taking like the opportunity to update a few issues that they used to have in the past, right? I had unfortunately like present about them in the past as not necessarily the best ones, implementing also internal links and navigation. They were using UTMs to tag their internal links and linking not to their original indexable URLs, but canonicalized URLs and things like that. But yeah, unfortunately, it seems that they haven't taken the opportunity, I'm afraid, to revamp or to improve things, and things don't look well. But this is the thing, right? Unfortunately, this happens to even many of us, even if the SEOs within the organizations or as consultants and in agencies, right? And unfortunately, sometimes these things are not necessarily well communicated, are overlooked, they are not informed on time. And this is one of those scenarios where it seems that everything wrong comes together. Like, for example, Matthew Dominguez here, he shared with me one of this most crazy type of scenarios that I'm very sorry, Matthew, that you went through this. Like, when the migration was released, and despite doing all the checks, he found out that disallow of the new language directory, the gbot, Googlebot was blocked, no follow on the links, URL parameters on each redirect URLs with canonical to the final URL, etc., etc. And like a few days after, robots.txt updated blocking the save parameter. Things like that, unfortunately, happens all the time. And not only with domain or URL type of migrations, also server migrations. It was very funny to see this type of scenario that Jana shared with me over Twitter too, about a server migration, right? And of course, you can see how they were alerted afterwards, not before, surprise, surprise, that they have moved from servers. And then all of a sudden she realized that it seems that they were using a plugin, WordPress plugin, that for caching the website pages, and it stored the former URLs and the plugin wasn't refreshed, and because of that, like the plugin was returning all the time like blank pages to the Googlebot. Crazy indeed. You can see here Jana describing the case, and again, it's like what are the chances? This is another very edge type of case, and as you can see, this happens not necessarily because there wasn't an SEO involved or they didn't know at all. It's because of miscommunication, not validating on time before and after, or a good alignment through the whole process, right? And this is why I created this checklist for a minimum viable SEO validation for web migrations to avoid these common issues. And then, of course, I did this Crawling Mondays about recovering from a web migrations gone wrong, because all of us, unfortunately, have gone through this type of scenarios. And finally, I also wrote this article last year about very handy SEO tools functionalities that can really facilitate our lives when we're going through this type of analysis, when trying to recover the traffic after a web migration gone wrong, right? And then again, it's not only with web migrations, but also when structural changes happen on the website, right? It seems that something happens right there, like, yeah, the URLs being changed, internal links are being changed, navigation is being changed, and even like that, like SEOs are not involved from the start, right? And this is an example that Carlos Castro shared with me regarding an example of a change of web structure and design, that the site was published with no index tag, and all the URLs were still getting traffic, right? Like, ouch, right? It's unfortunate and completely avoidable indeed. Or this other scenario, not only for structural changes relating technical configurations, but also those related to content pruning or content optimization or restructuring, right? In this other case, Don was sharing, like that team redirected every single vehicle page on an auto site to a lifestyle page with no absolutely words when reskinning the website. So of course, like, they lost the traffic. This other example here from Andrew from Optimize, another very similar type of scenario where in which all content was pruned, but this all content was really attracting really good traffic for the website, right? It's like, yeah, no validation was done of what was the role of that content within the website, customer journey, and yeah, customer acquisition, traffic acquisition, and conversion, which is critical to do. And this is the thing, right? In many of these scenarios, this is another one from Claire. And when you are a franchisee and you have a subfolder on the franchisor's domain, and the head office decides to automatically no index all news items after 6 months, right? Like, what do you do? Unfortunately, these are rules that come from above, and we end up having this type of scenarios where you need to just accept, which is also a little bit similar than this other that was shared by Owen at the end of last year. and he also did an excellent analysis at the beginning of this year about this case of an e-commerce website that decided to eliminate all of the block and informational type of content, and they came up into the realization is like this content is not only attracting top of the funnel traffic to the website, but it's generating tons of value in terms of internal linking, popularity, cross references, from a conversion perspective, also to those more transactional type of pages and queries that are critical for a transactional website, for an e-commerce website, right? So to do this well, I have also in the past done a crawling Mondays for this particular topic, how to prune your website content in an SEO process. And I have also shared a flow chart, taking into consideration like what is the role of the content. Should you just better redirect to more relevant or pairing categories, or should you actually completely index or canonicalize? What is the best method? What is the best path based on the value that these pages have within your website, and not only from an SEO perspective. Of course, you want to check the traffic, the backlinks, the rankings that these pages have, but also the role through the customer journey that should be taken into account. And as you can see, realistically, many of these bad scenarios are caused because of a lack of alignment with stakeholders and decision makers. And you will see that this will come again and again through this presentation. I'm afraid this is critical, this is fundamental. Communication, coordination, good project management principles are very well needed and should be highlighted more to avoid this type of scenarios, rather than, you know, the technical knowledge that we all have, right? Like we are all aware that these are important things to happen and to make sure that happen with an SEO process, but still like that, somehow they are not taken into consideration, right? And then it's also important to highlight how some of the most popular and classic SEO horror stories happen when handling international websites. Let's take a look at this one. For example, this is a classic, right? Like GeoIP redirects. When you want to redirect to refer the user to the right version, to the right country version, right? I end up also redirecting the Google bot without realizing that the Google bot pretty much comes from the US and all the very few countries. But of course, if you have many international web versions that are targeting many other countries than from which the Google bot comes, you might end up not necessarily showing those versions at all to the Google bot ever, because you are always referring to certain versions of your site. This is another example from Yusuf again, very similar situation from GeoIP redirects. Avoid those. Don't take the user on the crawler where they haven't asked to go. It's much better to follow even the guidelines that are provided by Google itself. They have many times communicated that they don't recommend to automatically redirect the Google bot or the user to a specific web version because of these reasons. And the best way is to refer to the best fitting web version, international version of the site in an unintrusive way, allowing the user to select. And once that the user selects that they want to access to that version, they can then be referred to that version by using cookies, by making this behavior very specific and personalized completely to the user, right? And another very common SEO horror story for international type of websites, and this is a classic. Of course, there isn't an SEO horror stories presentation without this Azure flag annotations. Azure flag annotations, here you can see how some websites go crazy with them. In this case, it's a very well-known website, Stripe. Take a look at the values that they're using on the URLs. It's crazy. It's like, indeed, it seems that they're generating all of this different type of permutations and within their structure, because indeed they need to validate, they need to assess and show potentially different type of versions of their content based on language, country, currency, I don't know, so many different type of criteria that they might take into consideration from a business perspective. But that doesn't mean that they need to output that without validating at all in the Azure flag annotations values, right? So indeed, this is very common to use values that don't exist, that are not supported or by Google directly, or another very common type of situations, missing reciprocal hreflang annotations, having the no return tag of errors then in the Google Search Console international report, or that you are pointing to URLs that are not indexable, that are redirecting, or there are no index, or are canonicalizing to others, and then you have this no return tag. The thing is, like, many websites have found that they go crazy with href annotations because they miss out what hreflang is about in the first place. That is literally trying to specify and to tell Google, when you have very similar variations of the same page but targeting to different audiences, like which of this should be shown in which scenario, right? Like, for example, when you have the night pico blue for the US, for Australia, for the UK, you want to make sure that the one for the US that is in English too is the one shown there instead of the UK one, the Luxembourg one, or the Canadian one as shown in the example. This is the type of thing that you want to avoid in the first place, right? So this is why I created, again, this other flowchart here that you will be able to take a look and use if you want, to make sure that it actually makes sense for you to use hreflang annotations. And if it does make sense because you have very similar variations of the same page, then what you want to make sure, especially if you have very important restrictions from a technical perspective, is that you actually implement them in those pages that suffer from misalignment problems, like those pages that are meant to be targeted towards the UK but end up being shown in the US and attract traffic from the US, or vice versa, right? And to be able to do that, it is highly recommended that you take a look at the Google Search Console, Analytics, SEMrush, Systrix. For example, I also created a Google Data Studio dashboard to identify these types of the scenarios. But yes, I will highly recommend that you start just annotating and tagging those pages that actually have this issue, instead of trying to come up, and those structural pages that won't be changing all the time, like product pages, for example, that actually exist, category pages or main topic pages that actually exist across all of your international versions, right? And for that, also you have the hreflang generator, that so you can actually for free see which are the correct values to use. And realistically, most of the most popular web platforms like WordPress, Magento, Shopify, etc., will also offer multilingual type of plugins or extensions that will handle hreflang annotations with certain flexibility. And if you still have issues like this, you can use for example, the hreflang builder. And I know that since Dan is here, right, like if for some reason none of these options end up working, that you can use SEO, that you can use also indeed CDN's workers in order to be able to implement this in the worst case scenario, right? So as you can see, there are always alternatives here. What it is important though is that you use the right rules into consideration, and you make sure that you set hreflang annotations in those pages that actually make sense, and following the specifications that Google has provided for those too. And then another very common, very scary scenario have to do when doing certain releases, when releasing changes on the website, and doing certain tests that can end up hurting the crawlability and indexability of the website. Like for example, this, right? Tests environment not being made unindexable. This is typical, right? And it's crazy because we all know that we not necessarily can just rely on robots.txt to avoid their indexing, right? And there is a really great guide from Content King here, in which they give this comparison, they show this comparison that I'm showing on screen of the different methods that you can use, which are those that are more that have a higher human risk to end up like going wrong, like, and the SEO friendliness of each one of this. So I will say, like, of course, if you can do the HTTP authentication as much as possible, but if not, you have here the pros and cons and the different levels of SEO friendliness of each one of this, right? And of course, like, we have other type of really not necessarily ideal type of scenarios that we will tend to go through when dealing with this type of new releases on our website, right? Like the dev leaves the no index, no follow after pushing the website from dev to live. Or Sebastian here, he shared this crazy scenario in which he actually sent the robots.txt directive here to use, and the web developer somehow, like, he changed the directive that had been changed, and he was like, he just needed to copy paste, right? But still like that, he made this type of change. And again, this is why it is critical to always validate, and we just cannot assume that things are going to be implemented in a certain way, right? Even if we communicate them in a very specific and already following SEO best practices, right? The same with tests. When there are UX or design conversion type of tests with A/B tests or multivariate tests, this other scenario is unfortunately also very common, the one that Arnaud is sharing here. We end up like referring to a page that is non-indexed, or that is canonicalized to another one, or is completely blocked sometimes. And again, thankfully, it's not because of lack of resources here. We can see how Rachel Costello shared this insightful guide about the main challenges, the main issues, how we can end up and going into content duplication type of scenarios if we leave everything as it is, right? With the two variations being indexable or being linked from the site internally, right? But then on the other hand, how we can end up hurting the site crawlability and indexability if we redirect to the wrong version, etc. Right? So take a look at this amazing guide from Rachel, in which she covers and goes through the different considerations and how to better handle these configurations. And then another one, and this is the classic that I mentioned before, of main navigation linking with UTM parameters because of tracking purposes. You can track internal clicks in many other ways, from events to use the flow reports in Google Analytics to enhance link attribution, many other ways than relying on using UTM parameters and in those internal links. Don't do this, of course. And then on the other hand, another very obvious case, but in this case, not necessarily so technical oriented. This is the proof of why we need to align not only with the technical side of things or technical areas, but also the content, the link building, the business side of things. In this case, PR campaign that was successful, brought ton of links, but the page where the links were pointing were canonicalized to another URL that had nothing to do and was not necessarily like, the meaningful to rank for anything, right? And then of course, even when cleaning a website that has been hacked, it's important to make sure that the developers don't only say, okay, let's block everything so nothing is scrolled in the meantime, but yet that meantime can take weeks to clean up, right? Or again, as Eagle here in this other example shares, like when a salesperson who wants to try to come up with something really creative to run a test to attract more customers, end up running a pure spam PPV campaign, right? Like you need to be alert. We need to set certain systems to identify this type of situations, which is why, again, I actually wrote about these topics a few weeks ago. Not so long ago, I created this post regarding why it is critical to align SEO within the products triangle. So, and this means also talk and communicate and have this fluid coordination with those decision makers and stakeholders from other areas, from the technical side of things, the overall growth, not only SEO, also those that have to do with business, because the more aligned we are, the more support we will have from these other areas and easier will be to implement things. And to finish a little bit with the presentation, because we are running a little bit out of time, right? Like here are those new SEO horror stories that we didn't have 5 years ago, but are now some of the worst, right? And we should be very, very scary. These are the ones that, for which I use this. I actually, how do you say this in English? I actually don't know how to, is the?
Which word? The whip.
The?
Whip.
The whip.
Whip. WHIP. whip.
Oh, the whip is true. Okay,
Yeah.
interesting. Esto es látigo en español. In Spanish, this is látigo. I didn't know how to say whip. Okay, so these are the type of scenarios for which I use my whip. Not very hard. I'm not violent, please. But okay, let's continue. Let's start with those, one of the most common ones and the worst ones in 2020, and the new ones, the ones that didn't exist 5 years ago. JavaScript frameworks, the usage and popularization of JavaScript frameworks, which we even forget about web standards. It's sad. And actually, when I ask about SEO horror stories, I go to quite a few of this. Take a look at this one from Christina and Antoine. Indeed, websites relying too much on migrating towards a JavaScript framework, relying completely on JavaScript to show the main content and main navigation of the website. And even not, one thing is to, I will say, we need to, I think here it's worthy to clarify. One thing is to rely on content side rendering, which is not ideal. Also, we rely completely on the capacity to Google to actually execute our JavaScript, that JavaScript is fast enough to be able to be completely render in the correct way and everything. But then also not following or not caring about web standards, implementing buttons without a proper href tag that can be actually crawled by Google, right? But using a button tag for a button, right? Like, no, don't do this. There are web standards for a reason, right? Another example here is also here with Barry, right? Like there are actually product owners or business owners that they know about this and they implement their own websites, new websites with JavaScript, and they are told, oh no, we are fully server-side rendered. No, don't worry about that, etc. And then here is this example of him like crawling without and with JavaScript and finding a difference of 400K pages versus 40K pages, right? It's non-trivial. So this is very highly overlooked. Sometimes even web developers don't pay necessary attention to this, and they are showing much more of what they think using JavaScript. So it's critical to validate this. And again, it's not because we, at this point, we're in a much better position and stage than a couple of years ago. There is really good documentation nowadays from Google here. Martin Split has done a great work explaining how they deal with JavaScript, also many do's and don'ts. Then we also have a lot of great guides and troubleshootings, guides, do's and don'ts from many other SEOs, like Wanli has done a great work with their ultimate guides like this that we can take also as a reference. So again, there are plenty of solutions. What is important is that these are taken into consideration before migrating or releasing to a JavaScript framework. And last but not least, as we can see, and this is something that was not happening as it is right now with Google Core updates. Of course, 5 years ago, we had all the type of updates, but in these cases, especially for the your money of your life type of websites, oh my God, some people, they say that they are more scared from this than actually Corona, but I am scared of both, I have to say, scary stuff, because of this, right? Many scenarios have been shared in the past of websites that have literally done nothing, right? Nothing wrong, nothing bad. They continue with their usual SEO activities, but after every release of a Google Core update, we can see how they are whether like go very deep and they can lose like 80% of traffic, or they can really grow crazily, right? So, and this can kill you when you are doing any type of projections or forecasts of your work, right? What you can actually expect. This is actually a case of my own, right? Like this is a fintech type of website, and indeed there's a lot of work going on this website. Really great user experience, great content. A lot of work going on improving the internal website structure, taxonomy, structured data implementation, actually building a knowledge graph for the website in the best possible way. And again, because they are in the financial area, we can see how in some cases, after some of the core updates, they have been affected. Then in some cases, we can see how they are affected for a week, a couple of weeks, and they regain. It's like go running a few tests there, A/B tests right there, right? But again, it's painful that this happens when there is so much really good, consistent work going on, and it's a little bit like, oh, you're in your money or your life, and you're like a little bit like this. You try to follow the EIT best practices and principles into consideration and evangelize about this and align everything with the student, which can be a little bit trickier because many companies will say that this go beyond, well beyond from the typical type of SEO technical core activities with content, right? And with real content or technical configurations, right? But realistically, this is critical, this is important. Google last year, they shared their criteria that they take into consideration from an expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness into consideration for this core updates. I have done also a Crawling Mondays about this topic with Lily Ray and Mary Haynes, who are very highly focused on these topics, and it's amazing. Take a look at this. And also I share, and actually I use this checklist that I'm sharing right here to assess whenever I am doing an audit and I see that there have been disrupts after core updates, like what is going on, what I'm doing wrong realistically. Is there something that I actually need to change, or I just need to let things be and warn the customer, right, the client, in case that they are within any of these sectors, so they are aware, and to align what is expected, right? Setting the right expectations is everything, and having a fluid communications about this, right? Whether they are doing something right or wrong. And yes, this is 2020, SEO horror story. They are pretty wild, right? Like, because we are still suffering and have inherited from many from the past that are still there, and with all of this layer of additional complexity coming with updates and JavaScript and many things we need to take care of as SEOs, right? And last but not least, I couldn't say goodbye to this crazy year without sharing this one from Easy about, yes, the Corona year 2020, giving a talk in front of real life humans, so different right now in 2020. I have to say though, that at least this is something that we can expect that in the future improves, right? Hopefully, right? Crossing fingers here for the better. And just a reflection here before finishing is about how many of these SEO horror stories are very aligned to the causes of the issues of why SEO failed, right? Last year I did this presentation at Brighton SEO, for which I did this poll, I asked many SEOs, like more than 500 answer, and most of the issues for SEO success, challenging SEO success, had to do with budget, having resources, and then client communication, alignment, flexibility, right? And we can see that indeed, we can say that all of these are execution problems, as Kevin in the here say, like, yeah, SEO is an execution problem, not necessarily a knowledge problem for many of us who are actually specializing in this. But realistically, remember who execute things. These are people, right? So this is why it's fundamental, and I will highlight this more than ever, having a really good communication, prioritization, and positioning with our clients or with the stakeholders and the decision makers, right? Because all of these issues happen not because we don't know about them, it's because, yes, like, we need to align very well with all of the team members and decision makers to avoid this from happening, right? And of course, we always need to validate for yourself. Assumptions are the mother of fuck-ups, and I agree with this, unfortunately, still today. We need to validate manually through the different workflow of the website before and after releasing, automatically by doing some frequent crawls that we should left as set by default with any new client, and then of course setting SEO alerts to be warned on real time whenever some of this misconfigurations end up being triggered, right? Like little warning and content are great for this too. So hopefully with all of these resources, you will have a much better 2021 and the rest of 2020, hopefully with less SEO horror stories. Hopefully also this served for you to see that you're not the only one suffering from these issues. Many of us are. And hopefully coming together and supporting each other, we will feel a little bit better, hopefully. Not alone, don't feel alone, please. As you can see, we all go through this stuff. I am actually sharing this SEO horror stories through this Twitter handle that I have shared here, SEO horror stories, as you can see. And let me know if you have, of course, any questions, any doubts, anything else. I am very reachable also and active over Twitter. Thank you very much, Dan, for this very fun opportunity. And I am enjoying so much here my in the Aleyda custom, I think that I will spend the rest of the day like this and not whipping anybody though. Don't worry.
I was going to say, on that note, just a public health warning to Aleyda's immediate surroundings. She's armed with a whip and in public. Thank you very much, Aleyda, for collating all those great horror stories and for taking time to come and be a part of this. Hopefully a little bit more fun. And you really are playing that whip, I'm now concerned.
You know, this is scary. I should stop. Oh my God. This cannot end well at all.
So there's going to be a light fitting or a ceramic broken soon. But what I want to say is thank you to Aleyda and thank you to everyone for watching this Halloween special. Throughout this week, coming up to Halloween, we are releasing multiple episodes of multiple people who are speaking and have also got into a Halloween spirit. So if you've not watched all the others after Aleyda's video, please check out the link in the description and make sure that you watch everyone's because they're all great. So I've been Dan Taylor and I've done very little in this video, but thank you to Aleyda.
Thank you very much, Dan.